What species had a brain the size of yours, made jewelry before any civilization existed, and left its DNA in your blood, and we had it completely wrong? The Denisovans. Identified from a single finger bone smaller than a dime. For 15 years, a ghost, one paragraph in a textbook. Then a skull hidden in a Chinese well for 85 years gave them a face. They were not primitive. They were not extinct. And the proof is in your bloodstream right now. In 2008, a Russian archaeologist working inside a cave in the Altai Mountains of southern Siberia found a bone, a finger bone, from a child, a girl no more than 13 years old. The bone was so small it fit on the tip of a pen. Nobody looked at it twice. In that cave, teams had already pulled out thousands of animal bones, Neanderthal fragments, and stone tools dating back hundreds of thousands of years. One more sliver of bone meant nothing. The cave was called Denisova, named after a Russian hermit named Denis, who had lived there in the 1700s. For centuries before that, it had been just a hole in a limestone mountainside at the edge of the Siberian steppe. But the sediment layers inside it held 200,000 years of continuous occupation. Neanderthals had lived there. Modern humans had lived there. Hyenas, wolves, and cave bears had sheltered inside during ice ages that lasted tens of thousands of years. Layer by layer, the floor of Denisova Cave recorded who had walked through it and when. The finger bone came from a layer roughly 50,000 years old. It was sent to the Max Planck Institute for Evolutionary Anthropology in Leipzig, Germany, to a lab run by a Swedish geneticist named Svante Pääbo. Pääbo had spent his entire career extracting DNA from ancient bones, bones so old that most scientists said the genetic material inside them should have been destroyed by time, by bacteria, by the chemistry of decay. He had already sequenced the Neanderthal genome, the first ancient human genome ever reconstructed. He knew what human DNA looked like, and he knew what Neanderthal DNA looked like. When the results came back from that finger bone, they matched neither. The mitochondrial DNA was twice as distant from modern humans as Neanderthal DNA. The lineage had separated from ours roughly 1 million years ago, before Homo sapiens existed, before Neanderthals existed, before most of the species in our family tree had even appeared. This was not a human, not a Neanderthal, something else entirely. A third kind of human that had lived alongside both and left almost nothing behind. In 2010, the journal Nature published the finding. A new species, identified not by a skull, not by a skeleton, not by a single tooth, but by a strand of genetic code pulled from a fragment of bone no bigger than a penny. No other species in the history of science has ever been discovered this way. Every dinosaur, every ancient ape, every hominin ancestor before the Denisovans was named because someone held a fossil in their hands and described what they saw. The Denisovans were named because someone read a code that should not have existed and had no face to attach it to. For more than a decade, that was nearly everything we knew. A bone fragment, a handful of teeth pulled from the same cave, a name borrowed from a hermit who had nothing to do with any of it. Most textbooks did not mention them. The Denisovans were a curiosity, a footnote to the Neanderthals, who were themselves a footnote to us. A species that had walked the earth for hundreds of thousands of years, lived alongside our ancestors, and vanished so completely that a single fingertip was all it left behind. And then a family in China opened a well and pulled out a face. In 1933, a construction worker was helping build a bridge in Harbin, a city in northeastern China, occupied at the time by the Japanese Imperial Army. While digging a foundation for the Dongjiang Bridge, he struck something solid in the riverbed. When he pulled it free, he was holding a skull. Massive. Broader than any human skull he had ever seen, with brow ridges thick enough to cast shadows over the eye sockets, a jaw built like the hull of a boat, and a brain case large enough to hold a modern human brain. He had no training in anatomy, but he knew this was old, and he knew what the Japanese did with Chinese cultural artifacts. They took them, so he hid the skull, wrapped it in cloth, carried it home, and dropped it into the family well, down into the dark water where no one would look. 85 years it sat there, through the rest of the Japanese occupation, through the Chinese Civil War, through Mao's revolution, through the Cultural Revolution, when owning a relic that old, anything that connected you to the pre-revolutionary past could get you reported, imprisoned, or worse. 3 generations of the family lived above that well. They knew the skull was down there. Nobody talked about it. Nobody reached in. The secret passed from father to son in silence. In 2018, the man who had hidden it, now in his 90s, on his deathbed, told his grandchildren what was at the bottom of their well. They pulled it out, cleaned off decades of silt and mineral crust, and brought it to Chiang Ji, a paleoanthropologist at Hebei Geo University. Ji knew immediately that this was something the field had never seen. The skull was one of the largest hominin crania ever recorded, bigger than any known Neanderthal skull, bigger than most Homo sapiens skulls. Brain volume, 1,420 cubic centimeters, within the range of the brain you are using to process these words. The face was broad and flat, with teeth significantly larger than ours, enormous eye sockets, and a jaw that suggested a body built for raw physical power. The overall impression was of something massive, heavy, and strong, but undeniably human in shape. Imagine being the person who pulled that skull out of a well. You hold it at arm's length. It is noticeably heavier than a modern human skull. The brow ridge juts forward 2 full inches, a shelf of bone over each eye. The eye sockets themselves are the size of billiard balls. The teeth are broad and worn from a lifetime of use. You are staring at a face that walked the earth more than 146,000 years ago. A face that no living human has seen until this moment. And you found it at the bottom of a well in your own backyard. In 2021, a team of researchers classified the skull as Homo longi, Dragon Man, a name that made headlines around the world. But the real answer was still hiding. It was trapped inside the skull's teeth. In 2025, a team led by paleoanthropologist Xiaomei Fu extracted DNA from the calcified dental plaque still stuck to Dragon Man's teeth. Plaque, the same substance your dentist scrapes off twice a year, had preserved genetic material for over 100,000 years inside a matrix of calcium and bacterial residue. The results, published in the journal Cell, confirmed what a small group of geneticists had suspected for years. Dragon Man was a Denisovan. The ghost had a face, and the face did not look like what anyone expected. Researchers who studied the skull concluded that a Denisovan dressed in modern clothing might not stand out dramatically on a city street. Big, heavy-browed, muscular, but recognizably close to human, closer than most people had imagined. Since the first discovery, the Denisovans had been a name without a face, a line of code without a body. Now they had a face, and it looked uncomfortably like ours. But the face was not the revelation that changed everything. The DNA inside that plaque revealed something far stranger. There was not one type of Denisovan. There were at least 3. In 2019, a team led by geneticist Murray Cox at Massey University in New Zealand published a paper in the journal Cell that redrew the Denisovan family tree from the ground up. Using DNA extracted from modern populations across Asia, Southeast Asia, and Oceania, people alive today who still carry fragments of Denisovan genetic code, they identified at least 3 genetically distinct Denisovan lineages. Not 3 families, not 3 clans. 3 populations so different from one another that one of them, the one they labeled D2, may need to be classified as its own species entirely. The first lineage, D0, is the one from the Altai cave. The Siberian Denisovans. Their DNA survives today in East Asian populations at low but measurable levels. The second, D1, appears primarily in the genomes of people from Papua New Guinea, where it runs deeper and touches more of the genome. The third, D2, shows up across broader Asia and Oceania, and is genetically as distant from D0 as D0 is from Neanderthals. Cox himself said this group may deserve its own species name, a population so different from the Siberian Denisovans that calling them the same species may be wrong. D1 and D2 diverged from each other roughly 363,000 years ago. To appreciate how vast that separation is, Neanderthals and Homo sapiens diverged from each other between 500,000 and 700,000 years ago. D1 and D2 are closer to that scale than to anything we would call the same species. That number is difficult to hold in your mind, so consider what it means. Every person alive today, every nation, every language, every war, every civilization, every religion, every empire that has ever risen and fallen descends from a population that existed roughly 300,000 years ago. D1 and D2 had already been separate for 60,000 years before Homo sapiens appeared. They were more genetically diverse as a group than the Neanderthals ever were, and the range these lineages covered was staggering. Evidence of Denisovan presence has been found at sites stretching from Russia to China to Laos to Taiwan to the Tibetan Plateau. A jawbone recovered from Baishia Karst Cave at 10,700 feet above sea level in Tibet was at least 160,000 years old. A tooth pulled from a cave in the mountains of northern Laos, deep in a tropical landscape of monsoon forest and limestone karst, dated between 164,000 and 131,000 years ago. A massive jawbone dredged from the seafloor near the coast of Taiwan, its size and shape unlike any known Homo sapiens fossil from the region, suggested they had reached islands that required crossing stretches of open water, from the frozen mountains of Siberia to the tropical caves of Southeast Asia, from 10,000 feet above sea level to the coastal waters of the Pacific. No Neanderthal population ever adapted to that range of environments. Researchers describe the Denisovan spread as spectacular ecological flexibility, but that phrase, academic, polite, designed for a journal, hides what it actually means. It means they solved every problem a landscape could throw at them. Thin air at extreme altitude, monsoon jungle at sea level, Siberian winters that dropped to 40 below zero and lasted 6 months. And when scientists looked at what the Denisovans left behind, the tools, the objects, the things they built with their hands, the picture stopped being impressive and started being unsettling. Because the Denisovans were making things that should not have existed for another 30,000 years. In the same Denisova cave that produced the finger bone, archaeologists recovered something that did not belong in a Stone Age site. A bracelet. A ring of polished green stone, a mineral called chloritolite, roughly 7 centimeters across, smoothed to a uniform sheen with a hole drilled through the center so cleanly that the edges showed no cracking, no chipping, no sign of the crude percussion methods used by every other known culture of that era. The hole was perfectly round, made with a rotary drill, a tool that spins at high speed while pressing into stone with steady, even force. That technique is something we associate with the Neolithic period, the dawn of agriculture, roughly 10 to 12,000 years ago. This bracelet is between 40,000 and 70,000 years old. That number deserves a pause. At minimum, this bracelet was made 30,000 years before the oldest known farming communities, before pottery, before woven cloth, before the first permanent settlement of any kind anywhere on Earth. A Denisovan sat inside a Siberian cave in a world of ice sheets and megafauna, a world where Homo sapiens had barely left Africa and drilled a hole through solid stone with a technique that would not reappear in the archaeological record until the world they lived in had ended and a completely different one had begun. The bracelet was polished with leather. The interior surface was smoothed in a way that required sustained, even pressure applied over hours, not minutes, not a few strokes, but the kind of patient, repetitive finishing that produces a surface you can see your reflection in. This was not a rough survival tool hacked out of necessity. This was ornamentation, decoration, something made to be worn, something made to be beautiful. And it was not the only sign. In 2024, archaeologists working at a site called Gantangqing in central China published findings on a collection of wooden tools dating back 300,000 years. 35 shaped pieces of pine, digging sticks, pointed implements, hooks designed to pull roots from the ground. 300,000 years ago, long before the bracelet, long before the finger bone, someone in central China was selecting specific wood, shaping it with stone tools, and building implements for tasks that required planning and foresight. Professor Bo Li, a dating specialist on the research team, said it plainly: "There is no question they were smart, they are intelligent, they are advanced. The hunting record matches the craftsmanship." In Denisova Cave, animal remains show they took down deer, gazelles, horses, bison, and woolly rhinoceroses, animals that weigh 1,000 pounds or more, animals built to survive Ice Age predators, far more powerful than any human. On the Tibetan Plateau, 10,000 feet up, in air so thin that most modern humans cannot function without days of acclimatization, they hunted blue sheep, wild yaks, and the bone evidence suggests they tracked snow leopards, not as scavengers, as hunters who stalked their prey across frozen valleys, carried their kills back to camp, and processed the meat in organized butchering areas with stone tools they had shaped themselves. If this is the kind of deep investigation you want to see, the full story behind the headlines, not the 2-minute summary, subscribe, because what they found next, inside that same cave, should have been impossible. A bone fragment turned up in the same sediment layers as the bracelet, no bigger than the end of your thumb. It belonged to a teenage girl who died roughly 90,000 years ago. And when they tested her DNA, the results broke every rule science had about how species work. In 2012, a researcher named Samantha Brown was sorting through a collection of 2,000 bone fragments pulled from the sediment of Denisova Cave. Most were animal bones, too small, too broken, too degraded to identify by eye. You could hold a dozen of them in your palm and not know what any of them had been. Brown used a technique called zoo-MS, zooarchaeology by mass spectrometry, which reads collagen proteins in ancient bone to determine the species it came from. Fragment after fragment came back as deer, as bison, as hyena. One fragment, catalogued as Denisova 11, came back as human. It was sent for DNA sequencing at the Max Planck Institute. The mitochondrial DNA, the genetic code passed from mother to child in an unbroken maternal line, came from a Neanderthal, and not a local Neanderthal from Siberia. Her maternal lineage traced to a population that had lived in Western Europe, possibly as far west as the caves of Croatia, hundreds of miles from the Altai Mountains. Then the nuclear DNA came back. Half of it was Neanderthal. The other half was Denisovan. This girl, who the research team would later name Denny, was a first-generation hybrid. Her mother was a Neanderthal who had traveled, or whose ancestors had traveled, from the other end of the continent. Her father was a Denisovan who had grown up in or near this very cave. She died at about 13 years of age. Her entire existence, everything science will ever know about her, is preserved in a sliver of bone smaller than a guitar pick. Think about what that means. You are watching this video because you belong to a species, Homo sapiens. Your parents belong to it. Their parents belong to it. Every ancestor you can name belonged to it. The idea that two separate species could meet, mate, and produce a child, a healthy, living, growing child, violates the definition of species that most of us learned in high school biology. Two species cannot interbreed. That is what makes them two species. Denny was that violation, frozen in bone for 90,000 years, and her father made it worse. When Viviane Sloan, the geneticist who published the finding in Nature in 2018, analyzed the father's genome in detail, she found traces of Neanderthal ancestry already woven into his Denisovan DNA, from 300 to 600 generations before Denny was born. His Denisovan ancestors had already mixed with Neanderthals long before he ever met Denny's mother. This was not a one-time accident. It was a pattern repeated across thousands of years and thousands of miles. Imagine being that girl, 90,000 years ago, in a cave in the Altai Mountains, winter closing in. Your mother looks one way, the heavy brow, the wide nose, the compact body built for the cold of European ice sheets. Your father looks another, taller, broader, with a face shaped by a continent your mother has never seen. You look like neither and both. And neither group has a word for what you are because the category does not exist yet. Denny lived. She grew to at least 13. She ate what both groups ate. She walked the same ground. The wall between species, the wall that every textbook describes as absolute, was, in that cave, a door. And people had been walking through it for thousands of years before she was born. But the Denisovans did not only walk through that door with Neanderthals, they walked through it with us. And they left something behind, something you carry in your body right now. Every person of East Asian descent alive today carries Denisovan DNA. Every person of European descent carries a smaller but measurable amount. And in one population, the Aita Magbukan people of the Philippines, Denisovan DNA makes up a larger share of the genome than in any other group ever measured, 30 to 40% more than the populations of Papua New Guinea and Melanesia, who were long thought to carry the highest levels. These are not trace amounts, not statistical artifacts, not noise in the data. This is enough foreign DNA to reshape how their immune systems fight disease, how their metabolisms burn fuel, and how their blood carries oxygen. And the DNA the Denisovans left behind is not scattered randomly across the genome. It clusters in specific regions, regions that control specific, critical functions. In November 2024, a review published in Nature Genetics by Dr. Linda Ongaro at Trinity College Dublin identified at least 3 separate interbreeding events between Denisovans and modern humans across the span of our species' expansion out of Africa. 3 different populations of Denisovans, 3 different time periods, 3 different parts of the world. Each event left different genetic gifts behind. The most studied is a gene called EPAS1, sometimes called the super athlete gene. It regulates how the body responds to low oxygen levels at high altitude. Modern Tibetans carry a version of EPAS, one that came directly from Denisovans, a variant that allows their blood to function efficiently at altitudes where most humans develop altitude sickness, pulmonary edema, or brain swelling. If you have ever met someone from the Tibetan Plateau, someone who herds yaks and carries heavy loads at 16,000 feet above sea level, where the air holds 40% less oxygen than at sea level, while you would be doubled over and gasping for breath after climbing a single flight of stairs at that altitude, that ability did not evolve from scratch. It was inherited. From a species that lived on that same plateau over 160,000 years ago and solved the problem of thin air through hundreds of thousands of years of natural selection. When our ancestors arrived tens of thousands of years later and mixed with the Denisovans who were already there, they inherited the solution, pre-built, tested, ready. But EPAS1 is only the beginning. In Papua New Guinea, Denisovan genes bolster the innate immune system, specifically the ability to recognize and fight off tropical pathogens that Homo sapiens had never encountered before arriving in Oceania. In Inuit populations across the Arctic, Denisovan-derived genes regulate cold resistance and lipid metabolism, the ability to convert dietary fat into body heat in temperatures that would kill an unacclimatized human in hours. Across populations in East Asia, Denisovan gene variants influence how the body regulates blood sugar and insulin response. This is not ancient history archived quietly in your chromosomes. These genes are active. They shape how living people fight infection, burn energy, process oxygen, and manage glucose. The Denisovans have been gone for tens of thousands of years. Their genetic instructions are still running in billions of bodies across every continent. But some of what they left behind is not beneficial. Studies have linked certain Denisovan gene variants to elevated risk of neuropsychiatric conditions, including susceptibility to depression and heightened stress response. The Denisovans did not just give us altitude tolerance and immune defenses, they gave us vulnerabilities, trade-offs baked into the human genome tens of thousands of years before the first city, the first written law, the first hospital. And in July 2026, a team at UC Berkeley looked deeper into the human genome than anyone had looked before. What they found was not one ghost species hiding in our DNA, it was two, and neither has ever been seen. On July 30th, 2026, the journal Science published a paper by 3 researchers at UC Berkeley, Yulin Zhang, Arjun Bidanda, and Priya Morjani. They had developed a computational technique called TRACE, tracking archaic contributions via ARG estimation, that could identify ancient DNA sequences hidden inside modern genomes with a precision no previous method had achieved. Where earlier tools could detect large chunks of archaic ancestry, TRACE could find individual fragments, small sequences of code left behind by species that interbred with our ancestors hundreds of thousands of years ago. They scanned the genomes of thousands of people from populations around the world, and they found 2 species that no one has ever seen. The first separated from the modern human lineage roughly 800,000 years ago. No fossil of this species has ever been identified. No bone, no tooth, no skull, no tool. Nothing in the archaeological record suggests it ever existed, except its DNA, which is present in approximately 1% of every human genome on Earth, African and non-African populations alike. It interbred with our ancestors inside Africa at least 50,000 years ago, during a period when Homo sapiens was still confined to a single continent, and it left its mark in every living person. 1% does not sound like much until you do the math. 1% of 3 billion base pairs is 30 million individual pieces of genetic code. 30 million instructions written by a species that has never been found in the fossil record, a species that lived, reproduced, and vanished so completely that the only proof of its existence is the code it left inside us. You carry it. The person sitting nearest to you carries it. Every president, every athlete, every teacher who ever stood in front of a classroom, all of them carry DNA from a species that separated from our line 800,000 years ago and disappeared without leaving a single bone behind. The second ghost was older, far older, a lineage that split from the human family tree roughly 1.8 million years ago, around the time of Homo erectus, one of the very first members of our genus to walk upright across open ground. This population, the researchers called it super archaic, interbred with Denisovans roughly 200,000 years ago. The Denisovans absorbed that ancient DNA and carried it forward, and when they later mixed with our ancestors in Asia and Oceania, they passed it along to us. You are carrying DNA that traveled through 2 extinct species before it reached you. From a population 1.8 million years old to the Denisovans, to you. A genetic relay spanning nearly 2 million years of human evolution, running through species that never met, separated by chasms of time, connected only by the code they passed from body to body across 100,000 generations. The Berkeley team's conclusion collapsed the neat family tree most of us learned in school, the one with clean branches that never cross. Human evolution is not a tree, it is a web. 5 species, at minimum. That is how many left their DNA inside you. Homo sapiens, Neanderthals, at least one Denisovan lineage. Ghost 1, Ghost 2. You are not descended from a single line that marched forward through time. You are a composite, assembled from the genetic code of species that fought, mated, competed, and disappeared, leaving nothing behind except the instructions running inside your cells. And that, all of that, brings us back to a finger bone in a plastic bag inside a Russian cave. In 2008, a finger bone sat in a plastic bag in a Russian cave. Nobody cared about it. It was debris, one more fragment in a pile of thousands. No researcher flagged it. No journal reported it. It sat in a collection tray alongside broken hyena teeth and crumbled sediment, waiting for a machine to tell someone what it was. 18 years later, that bone has rewritten human history. The Denisovans were not primitive. They polished stone jewelry with techniques that would not reappear for 30,000 years, using tools and methods that required sustained focus, fine motor control, and an aesthetic sense, a desire to make something beautiful in a world of ice and predators. They were not marginal. They spread across more of the planet than the Neanderthals ever reached, from the Tibetan Plateau to the tropical caves of Southeast Asia, from the Siberian Arctic to the islands of the Pacific, and they thrived in every one of those environments. They were not isolated. They interbred with Neanderthals, with Homo sapiens, and with at least one species so ancient it may predate the genus Homo entirely. And they are not extinct, not in any way that matters. Their DNA circulates in billions of people alive today. It helps Tibetans breathe at altitude. It helps Pacific Islanders fight infections their sapiens ancestors had never encountered. It regulates how your body stores fat, fights disease, and processes the air you are breathing right now. If you want to see the full story of the species that walked 3 continents before any of this began, the one that mastered fire, invented persistence hunting, and ruled the Earth for nearly 2 million years, that video is right here. We called the Denisovans a ghost species. A footnote, a paragraph that most students skipped. We were wrong about what they looked like, wrong about how many of them there were, wrong about what they could build with their hands, wrong about who they loved, and wrong most of all about whether they disappeared. They did not disappear. They became part of us. The next time someone tells you that modern humans conquered the world alone, that we were the only species smart enough, tough enough, adaptable enough to survive the ice ages and the droughts and the predators and the long dark of a Pleistocene winter, remember a bracelet polished with leather inside a Siberian cave by hands that were not ours. Remember a skull hidden at the bottom of a well for 85 years because one man refused to let an occupying army take it. Remember a 13-year-old girl whose mother was a Neanderthal and whose father was a Denisovan and who lived anyway, in a cave at the edge of 2 worlds. Remember 30 million lines of genetic code still running inside you, written by a species that vanished so completely it left nothing behind but instructions. Remember that the genome you carry is not a monument to one species. It is an archive, a record of every encounter, every alliance, every night when the boundaries between species broke down and something new walked out of the dark. We were completely wrong about the Denisovans, but the deepest error was not about them. It was about us. We thought we were one thing. We are at least 5.